All right, welcome everybody. This is the April 24th SIG Auth meeting. It's been a few weeks since we met. Before we jump into the agenda, were there any announcements, things from the earlier parts of the agenda that didn't have any entries that people wanted to mention before we got into discussion topics? Announcements, 1:30 is out. Yay, get back to work.
Hey, this is like the small peaceful time in between releases where you can like there's no release cycle yet. I can't possibly be working because I don't know when dates to work.
All right. We will move on to the items in the discussion topics. If you have things to add, feel free to add them to the end. We'll see what we get to. I am going to time box the first couple just so we have a decent amount of time to spend on the 131 sort of status planning, tracking to see who's planning on doing what and make sure and just see what we have gaps in. But let's take a look at the first item, mission webhook ID.
I don't see Max on the call. We could look at the Slack thread if you want to look at it real quick. Because I briefly spoke with him about it. It sounded like a fine thing. But the gist was he wanted to be able to look at audit logs for requests that were denied because of an admission webhook and be able to tell, I guess, through an audit annotation, which webhook did that. I believe that's what it was. It's been a while.
Okay. Recording which admission plugin denied a thing in the audit event seems plausible to me. That's probably over an API machinery land, but like it seems like a useful thing to have visibility to. I thought we already had it actually.
We have other audit annotations there, but I'm trying to remember in which cases those are used. I can't. It's been a while since I looked at the code. I know, like, why part of the reason I thought it would be fine was because we already were doing similar things with audit annotations at that layer.
Yeah, this will probably bring up the should this be an annotation or should this be a structured thing, but having it somewhere in the audit seems useful just for cluster admin like sanity. I mean, yeah. Tim, I see your hand.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to bring up. Yeah, this seems useful. It seems like something we should have. It looks like we already have it for admission policy. Extending it to everything else makes sense. And also this kind of runs into like, let's make it a field, not an annotation.
All right, so API machinery is going to say, yeah, that's fine. You want a field or an annotation? So
last time,
what would you like the field name to be?
Last time we spoke about field versus annotation, Jordan, I think the rationale you were trying to think through an API review was we would want a field for something that we felt like would be populated by most or a significant portion of requests.
Or it would be relevant to generic requests.
Sure.
So like the field that would only be relevant to the requests that were issuing a token didn't seem useful to have as a field. But like an admission thing denied this, that can apply to any request. So that seems plausible to be like a structured field in audit, I guess.
Okay. If we go down the structured field route, do we need an entire KEP because we're adding a field to an API? I don't know. Maybe.
I think it could be a short KEP. I think the it's worth thinking beyond just like a field to track what denied, like what admission-y things, do we not report at all today, or do we report using annotations? That should be considered. So I think it's at least worth asking the question, like if we're going to have an admission bit, what would make sense in there if multiple validating things or multiple mutating things made changes, like what makes sense to record in audit? And we don't have to do all of that in this one, but at least like thinking a little bit about what is likely to get recorded so that we don't do one thing for this and then sort of have a peer parallel thing that doesn't coordinate with it in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. Yeah, so perhaps it would end up being like a new substruct for admission, and maybe you would only have one field to start with, or some small number of fields that we could maybe grow. What happened to the text? Why is it so tiny?
I don't know. I blame Tim. He copied a small, tiny URL in there.
All right, I copied it.
Oh, I blame Rita. Okay.
Could this also be in part? I was looking for this. I thought this was part of metrics, but I don't think it is actually. I thought it was. So
I
should
don't
this
think
also
metrics can include arbitrary labels like
be? No. Yeah. So I'm guessing logs only then, right?
Yep. Okay. Let's see. I guess Jordan, you're writing notes.
Okay.
I can share this. I can paste this back to Max in case he's interested, since he did the Who Am I Kep. He might be interested in doing this one since
Okay.
it's similar scope.
That'd be great. And if I could get someone to also take notes, so I am not trying to take notes and present and moderate, that would be super helpful. Mo, you're up next.
Yes. So let's see. I made this PR a while ago, but then I didn't bring it up because it was like the end of the race and everyone was tired. I don't know if you want to take a minute to read that paragraph.
So this is saying tokens from issuers which we recognize as service account issuers or OIDC JOT issuers would not be sent, like if they fail those, they would not then be sent out to webhook authenticators.
Right. Especially now that it's very easy to have perfectly valid JOT tokens that arbitrarily fail your restrictive cell policy fall through into your webhooks, because they could still totally be valid, just maybe not valid for this cluster. But yeah, in general, to me, it seems strange that when we say that this is like, you could imagine if it's an issuer you understand and the token is valid, you would never call the webhook authenticator. So it's super weird that, like, I don't know, because it's not valid, now you do call the webhook authenticator and maybe it does authenticate it. Or
you could also imagine situations where the service account authenticator, like the token is a valid signed non-expired token, but like it's bound to an object that has gotten deleted. The pod got deleted or the service account got deleted or something. So it would fail service account authentication, but then get sent out to a token authenticator. Is doing this globally the right way to do it, or would the right way to do it to be to say in your service account authenticator, if I see a token that like is from this from this issuer but fails, like don't continue. it seems like making the authenticators that you're wanting they're like, I match the issuer but I fail otherwise. You want to stop sort of continuing in the chain at that point. That seems like an attribute of those authenticators. So like making the service account authenticator or the JOT authenticator
When
fail
you
and not continue.
when you say doing it globally, what do you mean exactly?
Like this is just changing the logic of the server.
Now, so not to
Behind
be
a date.
because we have random opaque tokens, other stuff, those still fall through the webhook.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's only if you see a JOT and it matches your issuer, do you not fall through?
Right. So that mode of operation, like choosing to no longer fall through, is that a global, like we just sort of defaults to that in the future and people can opt out globally? I don't know enough about how people are using the random JOT authenticators. Like the service account authenticator seems clearer to do that with, but like JOT authenticators, I don't know what people are, or OIDC authenticators, I don't know what people are using those for. If they,
But we already don't allow you to have issuer conflicts, right? So either 0 or 1 JOT authenticators will ever be valid for a particular token.
internally, yes. And then if it fails, it will send it out remotely.
Right. Yeah. So that's basically where I had the feature gate of saying, if you were somehow doing that, now you need to stop and give your webhook different issuer and your JOT authenticators or whatever. Like you can't either use a webhook or use a JOT authenticator or use them with separate issuers, but don't do all of it together and expect the JOT authenticator failing to fall back to the webhook.
I guess I don't know how, if people are combining like a in-process OIDC JOT authenticator with a more specialized advanced webhook authenticator. I don't know if people are doing that.
So the most common question I've gotten from AKS folks when working on integrating the JOT stuff is, they're like, can I run this at the same time as the webhook? Because they think they're conflicting systems. And I'm like, no, they're additive. So at least in my environments, people think that you're not even supposed to use them together, much less in chained ways. I can't speak, obviously, of other places.
Being able to opt out of like sending stuff that we think we already matched an issuer on seems useful. I'm fuzzy about whether to like make that opt in or opt out, or but like I like being able to not spray tokens out places. I don't have a lot more specific thoughts about like how cautious.
Yeah, I made it a feature gate with the idea that we would remove it at some point.
Right.
If we think we want the behavior forever, then it needs to be a flag, and then it has to have some kind of defaultness to it.
I mean, we've talked about like the structured authentication config. Like to me, this feels like an attribute of the service account authenticator and the JOT authenticators. Like in the service account authenticator, if I match my issuer, don't send the token anywhere else. Like, and same for the JOT authenticators. Like if I match the issuer, don't send the token anywhere else, even if I fail it for some other reason.
I see. So it'd almost be like opt-in at those authenticators levels, saying that they're like mutually exclusive with them.
I don't know. I thought about this for like the 4 minutes we've been talking about it.
It sounded to me like it was going to be one of those, when we stitch the chain together, there would be a way to stitch it with, if you I guess if you fail on this, error is
You
ugly.
fail for this reason. Yeah, like that's what's weird.
Yeah, I stitched it together very carefully using all of the knowledge I have gained from staring at OpenShift stitchings over the years. I do think it works, minus the fact that I didn't integration test it. I guess I don't know, David, Jordan, if y'all want to look at the PR and see what y'all think. Like, if we have to make it opt-in, I can do it that way. But at least then, like in my environments, I'm not going to let people try to chain JOT authenticators with my AKS webhook authenticator, and I'm just going to make them work with each other. So I just don't want to send tokens to my webhook that don't make any sense.
I guess we can maybe do a survey of like I mean, just like talk to the people we know who are running the weirdest authentication setups we know of, find out if anyone is using these in a way where they would expect the same issuer to be sent to both. If we can't find anyone doing that, then having it be global with a way to opt back into it and then letting it sit in that state for, I don't know, long enough that everyone who would be exposed to this would pick up a minor version with it and bump against it and have to re-enable it before we like lock it and make that the default. I don't know. I would start by like talking to everyone we can find and asking if anyone is expecting this or making use of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Based on what we find from that feedback, we can decide if we need feature flag, CLI flag, and what the defaults would be.
Yeah.
Okay. That seems funny. I'm fine moving on to the kept stuff because I know that will take time.
Yeah. All right. I don't know who updated this, but thank you for doing prep work so we can be more.
That triage meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Excellent. Thank you. Zoom in a little bit. So I think there were a fair number of things that were implementable, sort of already beta, promoted to beta, and so sweeping through those to make sure we're not forgetting about stuff that's in progress that could progress. Bound service account tokens. The one question I had was whether we wanted to promote the ability to create node bound tokens to beta and enable by default in 131. So we had to phase that in a release after the ability to validate node bound tokens. I think it's reasonable to bump that up to beta and make it default in 131, since 130 API servers can validate these by default.
Remind me, Jordan. So this feature flag, is it specifically for tokens that are only bound to a node and are not bound to a pod or whatever else?
Yeah.
And so today, I think we updated the CLI, like kubectl, to allow you to do this if you wanted. But there would be nothing in tree explicitly trying to do anything with that yet, right? It would just be a capability of the system, and maybe in the future we do something more useful with it.
Right.
I guess I have slight hesitation there in the sense of like, maybe we would just have more feature gates if we needed in the future, if like somehow this was like, say we needed to have more nuanced verification behavior, and therefore we would maybe then roll it out over multiple releases again. But I guess that would be fine because it would just be more feature flags. Like basically, I think the only thing you could use this for right now is like maybe some very specialized node agents or something. Yeah, I guess if we promote it, we should maybe at least write some docs to describe how we expect you to use this functionality.
Yes, I agree with all of those things. Nothing in tree is creating these yet. It does enable node level agent authentication, and we should document how, like, examples and reasons why you would use this and how you would use it.
Yeah, I guess I don't have any concerns. I think James had already tested all this stuff pretty extensively, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, the integration test coverage was really solid. Other than that, I'm fine leaving the rest of it in beta. I think people are still sort of, we just got the ability to make use of these, and so making use of the node information and token validation flows, I think it'd be good to get some reports on that.
But maybe before we move on, David, you had brought up the specific example in OpenShift where you guys were looking at using the fact that so you can see the node that a service account is bound to then have specialized validating admission policy. So if you remember my comments on that, where I thought that that was a really good pattern, and that we should maybe document and encourage that, but I didn't know if others had feelings on it.
I still think it's worth documenting and explaining. I don't believe that it is the same as this feature, though. So the one that I'm using also is bound to a pod, and it is important to me that it is bound to that pod, as opposed to just dangling. Okay.
It was mostly that now it is possible to have a new flavor of service account tokens that have node information in addition to maybe other information, and examples therein of how to use that. And like, I think you had like a E2E that you wrote.
I do have an EDE. So yes. I think it's worth documenting. I suppose I will find a place to document. I'm actually trying to decide if it's better to document as a doc or a blog post showing how to solve the problem.
I was going to ask, could you just promote your E2E to a Kubernetes E2E?
Yeah, I'd be happy to shift that into a QV2E as a demonstration.
Well, I mean, it's mostly just because it proves the whole thing works end to end, right?
It does. I am happy. I always like proof. So yes, of course, I was satisfied with proof showing it on OpenShift as real, but I will promote it to Cube and show it as a pattern.
All right, structured authentication config. Nish, Mo, you want to? I don't know, like, of the planned things, what remained, or if we're just looking to get sort of experience and soak on what we shipped in 130.
Yeah, so there's a lot of code refactoring, and there's two specific limitations that I know we have to address. One is the lack of egress network selection support, and the other is the lack of distributed claim support and cell policies. For now, my plan was to just basically leave it alone and let people use the stuff. Because if you need distributed claims, nothing prevents you from using the old configuration style in the authentication config. It still works. And you never had egress network selection support before. So it's not like a new limitation of authentication config. It's just a pre-existing one. So I am hoping to just let this sit for a little bit. And Anish and I might do a little bit this release, but our plan is to just hope that people try to use the thing. And we had blog posts about it. It wasn't a release announcement semi-retroactively. So I think we've done our part for making people aware that this exists. Now we just need people to go try it out and tell us if it works.
Okay. Are we doing anything to sort of seek out feedback, or like talk to people who are currently using token webhooks and say, like, if you were doing this for this reason, you can do better, smarter, faster things now?
I'm forcibly integrating it into APS, and
that
therefore
Great. Okay.
So give me some time, and it will.
I'm working on using it and will provide feedback is a much stronger statement than we're waiting to see what feedback we get. So I'm happy with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So it doesn't sound like we're actually planning to like block on any work there. Okay, for 131 in terms of planning out work. Structured authorization. Implementation wise, we actually think we are complete. Like all of the things that we planned to do, we have done. So we have reloading support, we have cell support, like we've done the performance testing. So we are in a similar get feedback mode. Leaving in beta for 131 is fine. I am working to start making use of this. I think you are as well on your side. So we should have some like field feedback to provide in the next few months.
I had maybe a question for Mo or whoever's working on the authentication config. Is it in a place where you'd say like a large platform could try it out?
I mean, if by large platform you mean AKS, then yes.
Okay.
Also, OpenShift seems to be working okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not aware of any limitations that would prevent adoption. One of the reasons it has the user info validation construct in there is so a platform can very tightly control the shape of identities that come out of such a system. Because they're all ANDed together, right? So no matter what you let your customer set, you set one in there that says you can't have one that looks like a GKE identity. Guess what? It will just not let you assert that. Right now, we have a sort of arbitrary limit on 64 that you can have. It's primarily because we do a linear scan to find the matching authenticator. That's one of the things I plan on fixing at some point. I would be very need more than 64, and you probably want to limit that more specifically. The other thing to maybe consider is we don't enforce any particular costs on the cell expressions, because the rationale is that it's a trusted config, but nothing prevents you from pre-validating the cell expressions and saying that, hey, the cost needs to be below some fixed threshold, which is
on GKE, our setup is pretty simple and constrained. We don't give a lot of don't let users do very much. So it sounds like we can just give it a try.
Yep.
All right.
All right, let's move on. Cluster trust bundle.
Yeah, I think where we are here is I've got a partway done implementation. Got slammed by some stuff in Q1, but I should be able to bring this across the finish line.
Okay, were there actual changes we knew of that were needed, or was it primarily a promotion?
Just promotion.
Okay. Okay.
I'm trying to remember a couple of meetings back to here. We had very specifically discussed a bunch of stuff related to this, but was it related to this or was it related to the projected volume or the serve?
No idea. I mean,
like we had a pretty long, like if you want to go back to the agenda, Jordan, like maybe scroll down. I'm trying to remember we had like a pretty detailed conversation on some of the things that we wanted to right there, maybe. Yeah. Some survive revocation, but then there was like publishing the well-known stuff, and I'm trying to remember which KEP is this one that we were.
That's cluster trust bundles. This one. I think we did not commit to any of them. Maybe we committed to. I'll have to reread the KEP. It's been a while. Maybe we decided to do the publishing.
Yeah, so the two streams seem to be revocation and publishing of trust bundles for Cube signers. Okay. We should at least answer those two questions and decide what's in or out for beta.
Yes, I thought, like, if you look at that, one of the later comments is for each signer in our documentation, export a set of cluster trust bundle objects holding the roots, right? I thought that was a decision we made, hence why it's vaguely written as a statement. Might be if you look at the recording.
That's my recollection too. Let me double check the KEP, but if it's not, I think we can do it.
Yeah.
I think what we were saying is we would publish all this stuff, but we won't start consuming
Yeah, nothing will use it. We'll just make it available.
So I'm going to retcon the notes from the last meeting and say these are the adjustments for beta. So like explicitly reserve K8IO. I guess like startup K8IO, whatever.
And that means just in documentation, right? No technical enforcement. I don't know how we could do technical
You could issue a
enforcement.
warning.
I mean, we could do things like we did for CRDs, where you have to put an annotation on the object to be like, no, seriously, here's the pull request where it was approved. At the very least, documentation.
I think that annotation has actually worked out decently well. It prevented people who were doing it by accident. And
for trust bundles, though, it's a little bit weirder. Like someone can absolutely have their own implementation of a signer that of a cube specific signer that conforms to the requirements that it sets, and they would publish trust bundles for the thing. Are we going to make them annotate their own trust bundles saying like, yes, I'm a trust bundle for the signer name I say I am? Like there's no approval review of a trust bundle. I don't know. We can figure out the details, whether it's docs only or like an annotation. An annotation makes less sense to me for this than an API, where it's like, here was the review and here's where it got act. But
yeah, in the KEP, we say targeting Kubernetes 131, built-in signers should export their roots where it makes sense.
Yep.
So if I guess the nuance that you're saying there, Jordan, is if you re-implement the built-in signers using your own thing and thus need your own publishing mechanism, that's totally valid.
Yep.
But if you're not doing that, don't just show up and make, mo.k8s.io and expect that to work long term.
Yeah, right. Okay, I will link to this bookmark. So I think largely it was those adjustments and the promotion.
Yeah, I just remember it wasn't just copy paste from alpha to beta and call it good.
Yeah.
Oh, and I guess we will need logic in the kubelet to use beta and then fall back to alpha, or what? Well, I guess no. This isn't. This is just the API, right?
No, the projected bit is there as well, and it is already. Yeah, so the kubelet use of a beta API. We need to think about how to promote projection. So if you allow the projected field in a pod, the kubelet can't satisfy that unless the cluster trust bundle API is available, which it is not by default. So we need to think about like the right way to progress this through.
I mean, it's all controlled by feature gates, so I think we should be fine to just switch the kubelet implementation to talk to beta. Let me say, if you're
Yes,
using
but the
alpha,
question is, do we let data into the pod projected fields by default before the cluster trust bundle API, which is needed to satisfy that, is on by default?
No, there's like a set of 2 feature gates. I can't remember how exactly they're set up, but it handles this. Like you're not allowed to create a pod that refers to it.
All right.
Beta is disabled by default. So even if the feature gates are enabled, the REST API won't be.
Need to untangle motion of CTB API, and then the pod projected volume field.
Take the 3 kubelet version skew into account somehow, maybe.
Let's figure out the details of this offline, but I think those are the things we need to do. Reserve K8s.io, figure out publishing for K8s.io signers, and then figure out the progression order so that like things are sensible by default. Okay. Legacy account service token cleanup. This is all GA in 130. We just need to update the account. So there's nothing else to do for this one.
Okay. So just for my recollection, so that means in 130 and later clusters, all the old cruft will be gone that isn't being used?
In a year.
In a year of it not being used.
In a year, the token secrets will get labeled as inactive or like unused. The unused token secrets will get labeled in a way that makes them no longer valid. And a year after that, they will get deleted if they're still unused. Yeah. So in 2 years from 130, the unused things will be gone.
Okay, in 136. Okay.
Okay, so now we're down to like sort of question mark things.
Let's see, I don't think Stando's on the call. David, I had asked him on the triage meeting if he might try to work on this in 131. He said maybe. I don't know if you know if it's
about what now? The reference grant?
No, the unencryptable resources.
Given current events, I'll say on hold.
okay. So deferred until later.
Right. So I'm gonna move things around. So it's gonna mess up your numbering. I'm sorry.
The numbering was screwed up no matter what. Don't even try. I don't even know why we number them. We should have just used.
All right. Reference grant. We're still actively meeting on this. The most recent discussion, I think, actually carved out some smaller pieces that would be useful. This got mentioned down here, actually. So sort of as a preliminary step, or maybe an alternative or a lighter weight version of reference grant, there was the idea of being able to scope read-only lister watcher things by label and field selectors. So I don't actually think this solves the reference grant thing entirely. Like there's other pieces of the solution that are needed there, but as a first pass of like things that currently are just being given global list watch of secrets, like only let them list watch TLS secrets labeled with Nginx ingress or something, like that would be super nice. So David had also mentioned he was interested in this, and Micah had also mentioned he was interested in this. So yeah, are there people who will help write this up and do it and implement at least these first parts, like the subject access review and the authorization attributes bits?
I'll do the subject access review and the attributes changes.
Okay.
My goal is to make it possible to show novel things out of tree. The node authorizer, the node author, I see them as distinct.
Yep.
Okay.
So David, if I followed you correctly, you're interested in basically the meta changes necessary for the authorization API, so subject access review and those types of things. And that would make it possible for like a webhook authorizer to do this stuff because it would be passed in this information and it could honor it. And then you're saying both node authorizer and any other entry authorizer things would be follow-ups?
They would have the information available to them.
Right. I'm not at this point, I'm not volunteering for the entry change. My primary goal here is to make it possible for us to be able to see, like, does someone want to invent an API to be able to say match on this sort of a field selector when this part of that field selector matches that part of a user, right? Like I don't know how to make that API, but I really want people to be able to do it so that they can come back to us and say, you need to make an API like this because it's so awesome. Check this out. The node authorizer may or may not be an easy add-on on top of that.
Yeah.
Once
There's no API surface there.
there's no
So
API surface, but there's also the like, do we say I know exactly what sort of query a kubelet will make, or do we say like I know the superset, and do I allow exactly or do I allow superset? Is
yeah, there's things to figure out there. I do see it as distinct. If your thing enables it, I would like be interested in doing or reviewing a change to the node authorizer as a separate additional thing.
all right.
Just I'd sign up for node authorizer if the fields are there.
All right.
Okay. And were you wanting to get something written up and done in the 131 timeframe?
Yes, I will.
Awesome.
He says without looking at the date for when cap freeze is. When is that?
Tomorrow. No, I'm just, I don't know.
I think I put it in this like not kept freeze, but I think I put in this doc that in like 4 weeks from now, you have your keps open and ready for review to give buffers between whatever the freeze and PRR deadline.
Okay, I'm going to move that up into needs cap plan for 130. And I'm putting this above reference grant. Hopefully people who are excited about reference grant won't get too bent out of shape, especially if this part would be moving in a direction that would let some things scope down access to controllers, which is like one of the fundamental goals of reference grant. Yeah.
I think both are valid, and if one is smaller and gets us somewhere closer to a solution first, sure, let's start
This
there.
is way smaller.
I would still like reference grant, just to be clear, right? Like I want this because I think there's an opportunity for someone to make a really awesome API if we give them the pieces they need.
And I'm not sure this is directly usable by reference grant, but I think it covers some of the same use cases as reference grant in a lighter weight way. I continue to think that this doesn't integrate super well with reference grant, and you still need reference grant for some of the attributes we wanted, like only granting access to things that are actually referenced. But all right, we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there particular things that people were definitely like planning on working on that they want to like call out? Because I don't think we're going to get to everything in the list.
I want to try to get pod certificates to implementable, but I don't think I'm actually going to be able to do the implementation in 131.
Okay.
But that's in addition to getting cluster trust bundles to beta.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so this is looking planning for design complete in 131. Okay, and already on there. Okay. Are we still? I guess are any of the reference grant folks on the call? Livermere. I don't see most of the. Yeah, I don't see most of the reference grant folks here. Yeah, I think we need to ask about bandwidth there. So I'm actually going to move this down to the bottom of the list just because we don't have clarity on this. I suspect that this will probably at most be design work for 131. But
I mean, there might be POC work, but I would be incredibly surprised if we somehow agreed to any amount of technical detail to get the actual code.
Yeah, I am happy to see these bits like actually become concrete. it at least gives things with webhooks access to that information. Right. This one. External signing. To hear and
Add me as an interested party, I guess.
yeah. Would you say your interest is greater or smaller than the pod certificate's interest in terms of like ordering and trying to get like a first version of this at least designed, and ideally like an alpha implementation, even if we need to rework or drop it?
I think if I answer anything other than greater, you will eviscerate me. So, greater.
Isn't the rule keep working on the things that are like already started before you start?
Pod certificate isn't started.
Cluster Trust Bundle is like the logical start of all of that, and it's like a natural continuation.
I don't know.
I think so. We have suddenly become urgently interested in this, so we will.
Damn it, man! Nah, they're gonna make my life hard if this exists.
So I'm gonna put Micah into here on here. And I'm gonna move this up into needs kept. There is one, but we kind of went around and around on it. Needs kept. I'm gonna put it above pod certificates. You're welcome. This is what strong arming looks like. Okay. We have 5 minutes left, and I suspect nobody has any more bandwidth to pull in anything else, and even what we have is a stretch. All right, I'm gonna go back to the main agenda there.
Oh, I see that it's crossed off now, the fine-grained kubelet API authorization. Yeah, I love to comment on the other doc we were just looking at, that there are some folks who may be interested in picking up this work in 131. So that would be someone outside the SIG doing implementation. I'm happy to be a reviewer on that. But I haven't gotten any official commitment yet.
Okay. If that comes back to something we need to pay attention to, just talk to back vendor or channel or mailing list or something.
Yep.
Anish, did you need an ACK on the repo creation? Was that like a administrative?
Yeah, so I am actually creating the issue, and I think they also want links for approval, either meeting minutes or like I start a mail thread or a Slack thread that I can reference.
Yeah. Can you point at the issue? I think we can jump in and thumbs up.
Sure.
Like we already talked about stuff. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll link. I'm creating the issue now, but I'll link it on Slack and then ping you.
Okay.
We okay with the name Secret Store Sync Controller, because the existing repo is Secret Store CSI Driver. So it'd be Secret Store Sync Controller. Is that okay? Yeah.
All of these are names that only a mother could love anyway.
I know. It would be SSSC.
Okay. Did you want to talk through this one to hear, or
This, yeah, we don't really, just a general sensing the temperature on the room. Right now, if you write an authenticating proxy, you can do most everything that a built-in authenticator can do, except you lose, like if, for example, your authenticating proxy were to interpret Kubernetes service account tokens, you could do everything except the object bindings.
Why wouldn't you just token review in your proxy?
Maybe you don't want to put that much load on Cube API server. Maybe you have other. Oh, this is not a totally fleshed out idea.
But if I understand the idea is, if I have an authentication proxy, I wanted to assert identity, but I also am going to embed some well-structured information into that identity that I then need the API server to revalidate.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about this both for tokens and eventually for pod certificates as well. Like, can't really do a token review or forward the underlying token if it's a cert based solution.
I think the hesitation would be is that, at least conceptually today, if an authentication proxy tells us something, like that is the truth, and we just go with it and we move on, is like kind of awkward to now say, I trust you for the identity, but not all the way, because now I have to check something else about what you just told me to make sure it's actually true. Like, would this imply to impersonation? Because you can impersonate all these fields, right? And so now we're gonna check the references in your impersonation. Makes sense.
One step more general from that, right? It's actually every authenticator. When the authentication chain is finished, we expect that we have a valid user. And if it were possible for a webhook to say, please accept this user, but only if this particular bound object still exists, it seems that parity would cause us to expect that, say, an OIDC authenticator would be able to do the same, right? This is valid, but only if this user exists. So
Yeah.
as an interest for just the proxy authenticator, I don't think so. As an interest for any authentication mechanism, where the service account token one today is special, maybe.
Is it structured today that the service account token authenticator does the object binding check internally?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I think this generalizes to conditions that are evaluated after the extraction of user attributes. So get user attributes, you check the signature on the token, you pull the user attributes out, then you have a set of conditions. You validate the certificate signature, you pull the user information out, then you have a set of conditions. The authenticating proxy does whatever it does, communicates the user info along with a set of conditions. Yeah.
So I think that's the general principle, but I don't know, like, offhand, whether I'm in favor of that general principle.
So it's certainly easy for entry stuff to make very careful, like, pod lookups and node lookups with caches and everything. And we fall back to live lookups when the cache doesn't have it, just to make really, really sure. I suspect we would do something terrible, or at least not perfectly correct if we tried.
Yeah, I think you get into weird edges where the auth integration thought it was giving conditional identity, and the server who received it didn't recognize the conditions or didn't know it had to enforce the conditions. So that's one weird edge. The other weird edge is, like, if you're putting an authenticating proxy in front of the Cube API server, like today, it's getting tokens that have like pod and secret claims in them, right? And so it could know, oh, I made sure the signature was good. Here's the pod claim. Here's the secret claim. Pass through those conditions. In 131, maybe we're going to get node claims. And unless your authenticating proxy stays perfectly up to date with what bound objects are in service account tokens, it's not even going to know those node claims are a thing. It should be passing conditions through on. And so when we talk about like re-implementing core Kubernetes authentication bits outside and then sort of expecting perfect fidelity of all of those conditions all the way through, I get really worried about that. We are out of time. I think it's interesting to continue talking about that. I agree it would be good to look at as a general thing, but those edges are what I'm worried about.
Makes sense.
And to this George's quick point, like if you did it, we have token review minus any scale or performance issues, you have guaranteed parity because you're always asking the server to tell you the meaning, not.
So what we're worried about
narrowly
is
about tokens, I would agree. When you talk about like TLS termination certificates, things like that, like that you can't, that becomes way harder.
like one of the things we're really wondering about in this line of thought is like DOS protection for the master. So we want to handle, we're considering, you know, cracking these tokens in a layer of like massively multi-tenant infrastructure in front of the cluster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to drop. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all. We'll sync up on 131 work. It's a lot to do.